Have you ever driven someone to a place and realized halfway through that they knew too much about somewhere they claimed never to have been? Have you ever listened to a passenger describe events in horrifying detail only to discover later they died in the exact location they asked you to take them? What would you do if the person sitting in your backseat turned out to be the ghost of a doctor who was found dead in the abandoned hospital you're driving toward, and someone inside that hospital has been waiting 30 years for him to return? My name is Jake Martinez, and I've been driving for Uber in Colorado Springs for 3 years. 3 years of military town pickups, tourists heading to Garden of the Gods, late-night bar runs, and the endless stream of people who need rides in a city that sprawls across the base of Pikes Peak. I thought I'd seen every type of passenger, handled every weird request, navigated every strange situation that comes with letting strangers into your car. But nothing in 3 years prepared me for the ride I accepted on the night of October 31st. Nothing prepared me for Dr. Richard Holloway, who requested a trip to Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital, a facility that's been abandoned since 1994, where Dr. Holloway himself was found dead under mysterious circumstances 3 decades ago. Colorado Springs in late October has that particular mountain town quality, where summer and winter are fighting for dominance. Days can still be pleasant, but nights get cold fast, especially as you climb in elevation. Halloween night was clear and cold, temperature dropping into the 30s, the kind of night where you can see your breath and the stars are sharp enough to cut. I'd started my shift at 9 p.m., hoping to catch the Halloween party crowd. People needing rides to and from costume parties, bar crawls, the general chaos of a holiday that gives adults permission to act like kids. The first few hours were exactly that. I drove a group of nurses dressed as various horror movie characters from a party in Old Colorado City to downtown. Picked up a very drunk Superman from a bar on Tejon Street and took him home to his apartment near Fort Carson. The usual Halloween nonsense, everyone in good spirits, tips flowing freely. Around 11:30, I got a ping for a pickup in the West Side neighborhood. Passenger name showed as Richard H. 5-star rating, no photo. Destination wasn't entered yet. The passenger would add it after getting in the car. I pulled up to the address, a modest ranch house in a quiet residential area. Most of the houses still had their porch lights on for trick-or-treaters, though the streets were empty now. Too late for kids, too early for the really drunk adults to be heading home. I sent the standard text, "Your Uber is here," and waited. The man who emerged from the house looked to be in his 60s, tall and thin with silver hair neatly combed. He wore slacks, a button-down shirt, and a wool coat, nothing like the costumes I'd been seeing all night. He carried a worn leather medical bag, the old-fashioned kind doctors used to make house calls with back in the day. As he approached the car, I noticed he moved with a strange deliberateness, like every step required conscious thought. He opened the back door and slid in carefully. "Good evening, Jake. Thank you for accepting the ride on a busy night like this." "No problem. Where are we headed?" He pulled out his phone, an older model, maybe 5 years out of date, and entered an address. When it came up on my screen, I had to read it twice. The destination showed as 4800 Pinewood Road, way out on the northeast edge of the city where development ended and rural Colorado began. I knew that area vaguely, mostly empty land, a few scattered properties, not much out there. "That's pretty far out," I said. "What's at that address?" "Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital, or what remains of it. The facility closed in 1994, but the building is still standing. I need to visit." Something about the way he said it made my skin prickle. At midnight on Halloween, an abandoned psychiatric hospital? He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I know how it sounds, but I have business there that can't wait. I'll make it worth your while. I'll tip generously for the inconvenience." I should have declined. Should have said I didn't feel comfortable driving to an abandoned building in the middle of nowhere at midnight on Halloween. But 3 years of driving had taught me that weird requests usually came with good tips, and I needed the money. My rent was due in 3 days and I was short. "All right, I said, starting the trip. But I'm not going inside or anything. I'll drop you at the entrance and wait in the car. That's perfectly acceptable. I won't be long. We pulled away from the residential neighborhood and headed northeast on Austin Bluffs Parkway. The traffic was moderate. Halloween partygoers heading between venues, late-night shift workers, the usual city flow. Richard sat in the backseat very still, his hands resting on the medical bag in his lap, watching the city pass with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not nostalgia exactly, but something similar. Like he was seeing places he recognized but couldn't quite believe were real. "Have you driven for Uber long?" he asked after a few minutes of silence. "About 3 years, you?" "I've never used a rideshare service before tonight. It's remarkable, really. You press a few buttons on a phone and a stranger arrives to take you wherever you need to go. Technology has changed so much." "Yeah, it's pretty convenient. Better than taxis." "I suppose I'm showing my age. In my day, if you needed a ride, you called a cab company and waited an hour. Or you asked a friend. The idea of summoning a stranger with a phone would have seemed like science fiction." We were leaving the developed part of the city now, heading into areas where streetlights became sparse and buildings gave way to empty lots and scrubland. The road stretched ahead into darkness, mountains visible as black shapes against the star-filled sky. "So what's your business at this hospital?" I asked, trying to fill the silence. "Are you a historian or something? Documenting abandoned buildings?" "Something like that. I used to work there, actually. Long time ago. I was a psychiatrist at Pinewood for almost 20 years before it closed." "Really? What made it close?" His expression darkened. "Funding cuts, mostly. The state of Colorado was moving away from large institutional psychiatric care in the 90s, trying to shift to community-based treatment. Pinewood was expensive to maintain and the patient population had been declining for years. But there were other factors. Incidents that damaged the hospital's reputation, made people uncomfortable with what was happening there." "What kind of incidents?" He was quiet for a long moment. "Patient deaths, suicides, a few that were unexplained, and then there was what happened to me." He stopped abruptly, like he'd said too much. "What happened to you?" "Nothing." I misspoke. The stress of working there, I meant. It took a toll on all the staff. But that's not what he'd been about to say. I glanced at him in the rearview mirror. He was staring out the window again, his face expressionless, but his knuckles were white where he gripped the handle of the medical bag. We were on Pinewood Road now, a narrow 2-lane highway that wound through increasingly desolate terrain. No houses, no businesses, just empty land and the occasional cluster of trees. My headlights carved a tunnel through the darkness, and beyond that tunnel there was nothing. "How far out is this place?" I asked, trying to keep the nervousness out of my voice. "Another 5 miles. The hospital was built far from the city deliberately. They wanted distance between the patients and the general population. Society's unwanted, hidden away where they wouldn't disturb anyone." There was bitterness in his tone. "That sounds pretty harsh." It was harsh. We told ourselves we were helping, that we were providing treatment and care. But really, we were warehousing people, medicating them into compliance, using restraints and isolation when they became difficult, occasionally trying experimental treatments that would never pass ethical review today. Pinewood had one of the highest patient death rates of any psychiatric facility in Colorado. We blamed it on the severity of the illnesses we treated, but the truth is we didn't know what we were doing half the time. His candor was unsettling. Most people don't talk this openly about their professional failures, especially not to a stranger driving them at midnight. That must have been difficult to live with. It is. Some of us never really left Pinewood, even after it closed. The place has a way of holding on to people. The road ahead curved sharply, and as we came around the bend, I saw it. The hospital appeared suddenly, set back from the road about 100 yards, a massive 4-story brick building that looked like it had been lifted from the 1920s and dropped into the Colorado scrubland. It had that institutional architecture style, imposing, utilitarian, designed to make you feel small. Most of the windows were broken, and those that remained intact were dark and empty. The main entrance was boarded up and a chain-link fence surrounded the property, though sections of it had collapsed. "That's it," Richard said quietly. Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital. Opened in 1932, closed in 1994. 300 beds at its peak, housing patients with everything from depression to schizophrenia to severe developmental disabilities. For 62 years, this building held the mentally ill of southern Colorado, and now it's just empty. I pulled up to the gate, which hung open on broken hinges. "This is as far as I go. I'll wait here with the car." "Actually, I need to ask a favor. Would you mind pulling up to the main entrance? I'm not as steady on my feet as I used to be, and the walk from here might be difficult." Every instinct I had screamed at me to refuse. But he'd been a polite passenger, and technically it was just driving a little farther up the access road. "Fine, but I'm staying in the car." Of course, I drove through the open gate and up the cracked asphalt road toward the main entrance. Up close, the building was even more imposing. 4 stories of dark brick, dozens of broken windows like dead eyes staring down, weeds growing up through the foundation. The main doors were covered with plywood, but someone had pried it loose at some point. The entrance gaped open like a mouth. I stopped the car about 20 feet from the entrance, put it in park, left the engine running. "Okay, we're here." Richard didn't move, just sat in the back seat staring at the building, that medical bag still clutched in his hands. When he finally spoke, his voice was distant. "Do you know what the worst part of working in a place like this was? It wasn't the violence or the sadness or even the deaths. It was the forgetting. Patients would come in with families, with histories, with lives. But after years of institutionalization, all of that would fade. They'd forget who they were. Their families would stop visiting. And eventually they'd just be a name on a chart, a diagnosis, a body taking up a bed, completely forgotten by the world outside these walls." That sounds awful. It was. But here's the thing about being forgotten. Sometimes you don't realize it's happened. Sometimes you keep existing in the space where you used to be, going through the motions, thinking you're still alive and relevant, when really you're just a ghost no one sees anymore. The way he said it made my blood run cold. "Are you okay, Richard? You're talking like what? Like a dead man?" He laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Do you know what happened to me, Jake? The real story?" "I don't know what you mean." October 31st, 1994, the night before Pinewood officially closed. I was doing final rounds checking on the last few patients who hadn't been transferred yet. We were down to maybe 20 people in a building designed for 300. It was like a tomb. And I found something in the basement, something I wish I hadn't. "What did you find?" He didn't answer. Instead, he opened the car door and stepped out. "Come inside with me. I need someone to witness this, someone to remember what happened here." "No way. I said I'd wait in the car." "Please, Jake. I've been trying to get back here for 30 years. I finally found someone who could bring me. But I can't do this alone. I need a witness." 30 years? What are you talking about? You just said you used to work here, not that you haven't been back in. "Dr. Richard Holloway," he said, cutting me off. "That's my full name. Look it up. Look up what happened to me on October 31st, 1994. With shaking hands, I pulled out my phone and Googled his name. The results came up immediately. The top hit was a newspaper article from the Colorado Springs Gazette-Telegraph, dated November the 2nd, 1994. "Psychiatrist found dead in abandoned hospital. Dr. Richard Holloway, 63, was found deceased in the basement of Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital yesterday morning." Dr. Holloway had been the hospital's chief psychiatrist for 19 years. His body was discovered by maintenance workers who were conducting a final inspection before the building was officially closed. The cause of death remains under investigation, though preliminary reports suggest cardiac arrest. Dr. Holloway had reportedly been conducting final checks on the facility alone on Halloween night when the incident occurred. Police are investigating the circumstances as unexplained but not suspicious. The article included a photo. It was him, the man sitting in my back seat, Same face, same silver hair, same tall, thin build. Dr. Richard Halloway, who died 30 years ago in the building we were currently parked in front of. I looked up at the rearview mirror. Richard was standing outside the car, waiting. When he met my eyes in the mirror, he smiled sadly. Now do you understand? I've been trying to get back here for 30 years. November 1st every year, I wake up at the house I used to own. Different families living there now, of course, and I have until dawn to find a way back to Pinewood. Most years I can't manage it, but tonight with these rideshare services I finally found a way. You're my ride back to where I died, Jake. Back to where I've been trapped ever since. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold my phone. This isn't possible. You can't be. You're solid. You got in my car. You have a phone. Dead people don't use Uber. Don't they? How would you know? Maybe the rules are different than we think. Maybe consciousness persists in ways we don't understand, finding ways to interact with the physical world on certain days, under certain circumstances. All I know is that I died in that building, and some part of me has been trying to get back ever since. And you're the person who finally got me here. Why? Why do you need to come back here? Because of what I found in the basement. Because of what happened. Because there's someone still in there who's been waiting for me. I'm leaving. Right now. I'm so sorry, but I'm leaving. I put the car in reverse, but before I could move, Richard appeared at my window. Except he was still standing by the passenger door. I could see him in two places at once. The physical laws that should have applied to him were breaking down, revealing the truth of what he was. Please, Jake, I'm not trying to hurt you. I'm trying to save someone. There's a patient still in that building, a woman named Claire Sullivan. She's been trapped in there since 1994, and she's been alone all these years. I came back to help her, to finish what I should have done 30 years ago. Trapped? What do you mean, trapped? Come inside with me and I'll show you. I promise you'll be safe. But I need someone alive to witness this. Someone who can tell the story afterward. Who can make sure Claire is remembered. Will you do that? Will you help me help her? Every rational part of my brain screamed to drive away, to get as far from this place and this impossible passenger as possible. But something in Richard's voice, the desperation, the genuine plea, made me hesitate. If this was real, if there was truly someone trapped in that building, could I live with myself for abandoning them? If I come inside, and I'm not saying I will, how do I know I'll be safe? You have my word. What happened to me was an accident. What's keeping Claire there is unfinished business. Neither of us wants to hurt you. We just need you to bear witness. Against every instinct, every bit of common sense, I turned off the car and got out. The night air was freezing, my breath coming in visible clouds. Richard stood waiting by the entrance, his medical bag in hand, looking more transparent now in the darkness. I could see the building through him faintly. Thank you, he said quietly. Follow me, stay close. And whatever you see or hear inside, remember that it's not trying to hurt you. It's just trying to be remembered. We entered through the broken plywood covering the main doors. My phone's flashlight barely penetrated the darkness inside. The lobby was vast, with a reception desk still standing in the center, papers scattered across the floor, graffiti covering the walls. The smell was overwhelming. Mold, decay, and something else. Something that reminded me of hospitals. That antiseptic smell that never quite goes away. Richard moved through the space with certainty, like he'd walked these halls 1,000 times. He probably had, I realized. He'd worked here for 19 years. Even dead, he knew every corridor, every room, every shadow. The administrative offices were on the first floor, he explained as we walked, his voice echoing strangely in the empty space. Patient wards on the second and third floors. The fourth floor was for the most severe cases. Violent patients, those requiring constant supervision. But the basement... He paused at a doorway marked stairs, basement access. The basement was for everything we didn't want people to see. What was down there? Storage, mostly. Old medical equipment, patient records, unused furniture. But also the isolation rooms. Small cells where we'd put patients who became too violent or disturbed. Padded walls, reinforced doors, no windows. We'd leave them there until they calmed down. Sometimes that took hours, sometimes days. That's horrific. It was standard practice in the 80s and early 90s. We told ourselves it was therapeutic, that it protected the patients from harming themselves or others. But really it was punishment, and sometimes patients died down there, forgotten in those isolation rooms, neglected by staff who had too many other patients to worry about. We descended the stairs into the basement. The darkness down here was absolute, my flashlight beam barely making a dent in it. The walls were concrete, unpainted, and water dripped somewhere in the distance. The temperature dropped noticeably, had to be in the 40s down here. Claire Sullivan was admitted to Pinewood in 1988, Richard said as we walked down a long corridor. Severe depression with psychotic features. She'd attempted suicide multiple times, couldn't function in society. Her family had her committed involuntarily. She was only 24 years old. What happened to her? She improved at first, responded well to medication, participated in therapy, seemed to be stabilizing, but then she had a major episode in October 1994. Became convinced that the staff were trying to kill her, that the medication was poison. She attacked a nurse. We had no choice but to bring her down here. We stopped in front of a heavy metal door. It had a small window reinforced with metal mesh and a complex locking mechanism. The number 7 was painted on the door. Richard reached out to touch it and his hand passed through the metal slightly. Isolation room 7. I brought Claire down here on October 30th, 1994. She was sedated but agitated. I told her it would just be for a few hours until she calmed down. But the hospital was in chaos. We were closing, transferring patients, staff were leaving. I got pulled into administrative meetings dealing with the closure and His voice broke. I forgot about her. I forgot Claire was down here. The horror of what he was saying sank in. You left her locked in there? Not intentionally, but yes. The closure happened faster than expected. By Halloween night, everyone was gone except me. I was doing final rounds checking that all patients had been transferred, that the building was empty. And I remembered Claire. Remembered that I'd put her in isolation and never retrieved her. He pulled out an old key ring from his pocket. I came down here to let her out. But when I opened the door, he unlocked the door as he spoke, the mechanism clicking loudly in the silence. The door swung open with a groan. The room beyond was small, maybe 8 by 8 feet. Padded walls, stained and rotting now. No furniture, no windows, nothing but concrete floor and those horrible padded walls. And in the far corner, barely visible in my flashlight beam, was a figure. A woman sat huddled against the wall, her arms wrapped around her knees, her head down. She wore a hospital gown that was faded and torn. Her dark hair hung limply around her face. She didn't move when we entered, didn't react to the light or our presence. Claire? Richard said softly. Claire, I'm here. I came back like I promised. Slowly, the woman raised her head. Her face was gaunt, pale, her eyes sunken and dark. When she spoke, her voice was raspy, like she hadn't used it in years. Dr. Holloway? Is that you? Yes, Claire. It's me. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry for leaving you here. I waited, she whispered. You said you'd come back in a few hours. I waited and waited, but you never came. The lights went out. It got so cold. I called for help, but nobody answered. How long have I been here? Tears were streaming down Richard's face. 30 years, Claire. You've been here for 30 years. You died here. We both did. You from dehydration and neglect in this room. Me from a heart attack when I found your body and realized what I'd done. Claire looked at me, her eyes focusing with difficulty. Who's he? His name is Jake. He's alive. He can help us. Help us do what? Leave this place. Finally leave this place. We've been trapped here. You in this room. Me trying to get back to you. But tonight we can both move on. Tonight we can finally let go. I found my voice, though it shook. What do you need me to do? Richard turned to me. Tell our story. Tell people what happened here. That Claire Sullivan died alone in isolation room 7 because I forgot about her. That Dr. Richard Holloway died of guilt and grief when he discovered what he'd done. That Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital closed with a patient still locked in the basement, and nobody checked. Tell the story so we're remembered, so our deaths meant something. I will. I promise I'll tell everyone. Claire stood slowly, her movements stiff like she'd been sitting in that position for decades. She walked toward Richard, and when she reached him, she took his hand. They both became more transparent, more obviously not of this world. I'm tired, Claire said. I'm so tired of being here. I know. Me too. Let's go somewhere else now. Somewhere we should have gone 30 years ago. They turned toward the door, still holding hands. As they passed me, Claire paused. Thank you for coming here, for seeing us. Nobody's seen us in so long, it's like we didn't exist anymore. Then they walked through the doorway and disappeared. Not gradually, just there one moment and gone the next. The room felt different immediately, warmer somehow, less oppressive, like a weight had been lifted. I stood there for a long moment, my flashlight beam illuminating the empty isolation room where Claire Sullivan had died alone and forgotten. Then I turned and ran up the stairs, through the lobby, out the broken entrance, back to my car. My hands shook so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The drive back to the city was a blur. I kept checking the back seat, expecting to see Richard sitting there with his medical bag. But it was empty. Just empty leather seats and the lingering absence of passengers who were never really there. I went straight home, called in sick for the rest of my shift, spent the rest of the night researching Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital, Dr. Richard Holloway, Claire Sullivan. Found Richard's obituary, found the article about his death, found a smaller article from December 1994 that mentioned an oversight at Pinewood. A patient named Claire Sullivan who'd been left behind during the closure had been found deceased in the basement. The article mentioned an investigation but was vague about details. Nobody had cared. A forgotten patient in a closing psychiatric hospital. A doctor who died of a heart attack during the stressful closure process. Just unfortunate incidents that got buried in bureaucratic paperwork and collective amnesia. Richard and Claire had died and been forgotten, trapped in that building for 3 decades, and the world had moved on without acknowledging what had happened. But I remembered. I told their story to everyone who would listen, posted about it online, contacted local historians, even reached out to newspapers. Most people dismissed it as an urban legend or Halloween story, but some believed. Some understood that sometimes the dead get trapped by unfinished business, by guilt and neglect and the world's capacity to forget. I never drove past Pinewood Hospital again. Couldn't bring myself to see it. But I heard from others that the building was finally demolished 2 months after my encounter with Richard and Claire. The property was cleared and plans were made to build something new. Maybe that's for the best. Some places hold too much pain, too much forgotten suffering. Better to tear them down and let the earth reclaim them. But I still think about them sometimes. Richard Holloway and Claire Sullivan, psychiatrist and patient, both trapped by a system that failed them and a society that forgot them. I think about how Richard spent 30 years trying to get back to Pinewood to free Claire, and how she spent 30 years alone in that isolation room waiting for someone to remember she existed. And I wonder how many others are still trapped. How many forgotten patients in abandoned hospitals? How many people who died alone and unremembered? How many consciousnesses still anchored to the places of their death because nobody bothered to acknowledge what happened to them? I'm more careful now about the rides I accept, more attentive to passengers who seem slightly off, who talk about the past with too much immediacy, who know things they shouldn't know, because sometimes the person in your backseat isn't really there. Sometimes they're a ghost trying to finish unfinished business, trying to be remembered one more time before they fade completely. And sometimes, all they need is someone willing to listen, someone willing to bear witness, Someone willing to tell their story so they don't disappear into the vast forgetting that claims so many of the vulnerable, the institutionalized, the abandoned. I was that witness for Richard and Claire. And if I'm honest, I'm grateful for it. Grateful that I didn't just drive away, that I followed Richard into that terrible building, that I saw Claire in her isolation room and heard their story. Because now they're not forgotten. Now someone remembers what happened at Pinewood Psychiatric Hospital on Halloween night 1994. Someone remembers Claire Sullivan, who died alone because a doctor forgot about her. Someone remembers Dr. Richard Halloway, who died of guilt trying to save her. And maybe that remembering, that bearing witness, is what finally set them free. If this story resonates with you, if you've ever driven someone to a place they shouldn't have been able to reach or encountered passengers who knew too much about their destination, hit that subscribe button. Leave a comment sharing your own experiences with the forgotten dead, with abandoned places that still hold consciousness, with people who died and nobody remembered. Maybe you've been asked to witness something impossible. Maybe you've been the bridge someone needed to finally let go. Either way, you're not alone. We're all navigating a world where the dead sometimes need the living to bear witness, where unfinished business can trap someone for decades, where being forgotten is a second death that some can't escape without help. Thanks for listening to Richard and Claire's story. Thanks for caring about two people who died forgotten in an abandoned hospital and waited 30 years for someone to remember they existed. And if you ever accept a ride request to an abandoned building from a passenger who seems to know too much about what happened there, don't ignore the details that don't add up. Pay attention. Ask questions. You might be someone's last chance to be remembered, their only hope of finally moving on from the place where they died. They deserve that much. Richard and Claire did. And so does every other forgotten soul still trapped in the places society abandoned.